Welcome to GNCC Espresso Live. My name is Mishka Balsom and I will be your moderator for the next hour. The purpose of this series is to better understand how COVID-19 has impacted our lives so far and to start thinking about tomorrow. How will this pandemic have changed how we live, how we work, how our societies will function? How has this impacted our corporate partnerships, supply chains, and international affairs? And how will it reshape our collective values and priorities across Niagara? It is critical for us to convene for conversations that encourage us to stretch our minds while determining on how to best move forward. The decisions that we are going to make in the weeks and months to come will be the foundation of our economic recovery. We are encouraged by the respect that has been shown not only among different political leaders and partners, but also in the public-private partnerships that have been formed in the joint commitment to support the slowdown of the virus. In addition, businesses have been able to adapt their operational model to online and alternate methods of delivering services and goods. Their creativity and resourcefulness are remarkable, and not to mention the generosity and support of those most vulnerable in our region. Since day one, our main priority has always been the slowdown of the virus. By following the advice of health authorities along with key federal departments and agencies in an effort to flatten the curve. While thousands of organizations have moved into temporary home offices, closed their locations, seen a significant decrease in sales, and had to let go of staff, these same businesses are realizing that we're in this for the long game, a marathon rather than a short sprint. Businesses have been loud in their asks from all levels of government regarding subsidies and provisions to rules and regulations. And the government is responding at a speed never seen before, as businesses are eagerly awaiting the conditions to change so that they can sustainably resume operations. To provide us with insight on the impact of COVID-19 on specific municipalities across Niagara, we're hosting multiple webinars with municipal leaders giving us an inside look at their own community. It is my great pleasure to welcome two distinguished leaders with us this morning, Mayor Marvin Junkin with Pelham and Mayor Redekop with Fort Erie. Mayor Junkin, Mayor Redekop, thank you for joining us.
Good morning and thank you.
Before we get started, the technology we're utilizing today is Zoom technologies. Participants are currently on mute and we encourage interactions. So if you have any questions, there are two options available to you. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see the symbol of a hand. And by clicking that, we know that you want to ask a question and we will unmute you. Please watch for it. And the second option is there's an option called a chat function. It's a field where you can type in a question and we can see it, the panelists and I can see it here on our end, and we'll do our best to get to it. Lastly, we had a high number of questions that actually have come in via social media or email for those ones of you who are not unable to join us this morning. And we will also try our best to get to those ones. Please know that this webinar will be available and on our website by the end of today. So it is being recorded. But let me jump into it. When we all look back on the past 7 years, our worlds have changed. Thousands of businesses are looking at completely new business models, all in an effort to stabilize their organization, their cash flow during these COVID-19 times. One of the learnings that businesses are discovering is that their setup has been efficient, but maybe not resilient. Mayor Redekop, if I can start out with you. When you look at your city operation and some of the decisions that you had to make, can you share some of the decisions that you had to make over the last couple of weeks? But in your eyes, when you look at it, do you think you're set up to act with speed? And is your system resilient in moving forward? Mayor Redekop.
Yeah, so the world has changed significantly in the past 6-7 weeks. And fortunately for the town of Fort Erie, we've been maintaining fairly strict controls on our budget, our financial system over the past several years. We've been building up our reserves. We've been reducing our debt. We've been trying to maintain taxes at lower levels to facilitate the growth that's taking place in our community, both on the residential side, but also on the business side, so that we've had some flexibility in terms of dealing with this particular crisis. We haven't really had to lay off individuals, and what that's meant is that we've been able to do in the back rooms all of the work that we typically would be doing. So in terms of planning, we've been processing applications for building permits, applications for rezonings and amendments, committee of adjustment applications. So we haven't had public hearings yet. We are scheduled to do our first committee of adjustment meeting virtually on May the 21st. But in terms of building permits, we've got about 50 building permits ready to go as soon as the province indicates that residential construction and commercial construction that's currently defined as essential or non-essential is now essential. So we've got that. We've been still holding our pre-consultation meetings, which means that if people have development plans they want to move forward, we're still meeting with them. We're doing that virtually. On the public works side, we're still doing our engineering. We're still doing our planning in that regard. We haven't been doing any construction yet. We've asked our contractors to hold off because most of our projects wouldn't be considered essential. But we do have our workers, the water and sewer workers, the road workers. They're out. They're working as they did before. We're currently going to be going to, starting next Monday, 12-hour work shifts so that we can ensure that our workers stay separate, that that they maintain as much social distance as possible. And where we can, we're making sure that individuals in a crew can go out in separate vehicles. And then we're doing the same thing with the parks. There is some work being done in our parks in terms of grass cutting because of ticks and because of the need to maintain what we've got so that we're not in a position where we've got to spend a lot of time and energy regenerating our parks. And of course, we're keeping our recreation trail open. The big challenge for us has been making sure that the public is fully aware of what the province is directing, what the federal government is directing, and how we're interacting with that. So we've been able to work with the other mayors. I must say that it's a very congenial group and we get along very well. We've had regular meetings on Wednesday mornings, including the regional chair, and we talk about a variety of issues. And we've committed to trying to make sure that as we go forward, we're all doing that in lockstep so that we're not in a situation where the residents of one municipality can say, well, we can't do this in Fort Erie, but they can do this someplace else. And so we're trying to work on that. And hopefully that will continue on until such time as the provincial directives start to be lessened and people can do more and more things. So I know this is a large question, could take up the whole hour, but why don't I stop there and let Mayor Junkin chime in? And I hope that that's responded to the essence of your question.
It most definitely has. And it's really encouraging for us to hear as well, is that because businesses in Niagara do business in more than one of the municipalities. And to hear that you are actually working together is encouraging because it allows actually business to move forward with the project that impacts a number of their locations and a number of their own issues too. Over to you, Mayor Junkin. On the same question, you have also had to make very difficult decisions. When you now look at the town of Pelham, do you see the town of Pelham being set up? Is it resilient to deal with this crisis that we're finding ourselves in?
Yes, thank you for the question. So we're a little bit different than Wayne is down in Fort Erie. We have just built a $40 million community center, so and our reserves are very low, so we are momentarily asset rich but a cash strapped community. That being said, perhaps that makes us even more conscious of the steps that we have to take to keep our spending just right down to bare minimum. So already at this stage we have laid off 32 office workers, overall workers, let's just say that way. Some of them have been at the MCC community center. We've laid off office staff. So between voluntary layoffs and mandatory layoffs, like I say, on a workforce of about 63, 64 people, we have laid off 32. So that was a big chunk. And the fact that the staff meet every day with the emergency team to discuss the effects of the virus on the community, on the region. I think we have a very reactionary team, very fluid team. And we can see if changes are going to happen, if changes are coming. We're a small enough community that we can react very quickly. As far as the remaining workers, I believe there's only 2 that are actually at the office, municipal office, which of course, like all other municipal offices in the region, are it's closed to the public. So our vast majority of the remaining workers in the office are indeed working from home. And like I believe every other community or municipality in the region, we have kept our planning department open and our engineering. We've been letting out the building permits. So again, as Wayne stated, when we get the official word from the government, provincial government, that we can open up some of these businesses from non-essential and they become essential, building houses, infrastructure, we'll be ready to jump right at the gun. Public Works, we've already instituted 12-hour shifts, and we have leased 1 more truck to institute the 1 man per truck for safety for the workers. Yeah, just like I say, I feel that we're very we've cut down costs and also in infrastructure. We went back. We didn't reopen the whole budget, but we had a road that got washed out 3 years ago. We decided that, well, it waited this long, we'll probably have to let it wait 1 more year, and then we put off a sewer project that wasn't essential. So between those 2 projects, that's 1.7 million that we've taken off of the infrastructure budget, and that's our total budget on a yearly basis is 23 million. So that 1.7 is a substantial step in the right direction. Yeah, just yeah, like I say, we're watching the situation, if not daily, then at least weekly. And I'm very happy with how our staff, the senior management level, has responded to the effects of this pandemic.
Actually, I have been encouraged across Niagara by the responsiveness from all local governments. It's been really good to see. Mayor Junkin, I actually also appreciate your frankness when talking about the reserves, and that you likely are in a different financial position than another municipality might be in Niagara. And I think that is the case, that the challenges might be different from municipality to municipality, and the decisions will be different too. I believe that it is good for businesses to hear and to see sometimes that we're all in this together, and that no one is isolated from the impact that this position has. We have already seen that. We have already learned it's not just a health crisis, it's an economic one too, but it actually impacts every single facet of our life. And sometimes there is some comfort that comes with it, that we're in this together because we hear and listen to each other differently and looking for solutions. One of the questions that it has pushed, and maybe the timing is right, both of you have touched on it a little bit, but it's looking at municipal infrastructure. One of the questions have come forward and has to do with public transportation. There are many people dependent on it. And how do you see public transportation likely change, ridership, the safety to ensure that we prevent the spread of infectious diseases? And then at the same time, the other aspect of it is looking at streets, looking at beaches, looking at sidewalks. What is your foreseeable what are your foreseeable plans when you look at maybe retrofitting some of it, considering social distancing? How do you see us moving forward? And just 2 aspects which every resident of every community depends on the municipality to assist them in those 2 areas of it. Mayor Junkin, if I can ask you maybe to look at that first.
Yes. So the transportation, We've again, that was something we've acted on. We had it coming before the pandemic. It was actually instituted to be brought in this spring. So what we have gone to is a complete system of dial a bus. So we no longer have a bus going around on a set route at set times. If someone wants to ride on the bus, they phone in the day before, tell us where they want to go, what time they want to be picked up, and that bus will go right to their driveway. So that's and each bus is indeed set out as a to look after handicapped riders. So if it works out that we can pick up 2 or 3 people at once and then and do it that way, that's how they handle the rides. If not, if it's just one person going to one location, so be it. That's the way it goes. So so that was great that we instituted that. No one wants to see city buses traveling up and down the roads, especially in a pandemic when everybody's supposed to stay home anyway. This is obviously, I was happy that this is how we chose to go. And it was great that staff in the region worked with us to bring this to Pelham particularly at this particular time. As far as I believe the other part of the question was how we plan on opening infrastructure. Is that?
Yeah, streets, sidewalks, like how do you foresee it?
So I'm looking forward to this, obviously, like everybody else. I think that we've got the worst behind us. So as far as, and the nice thing about it is, as Canadians, not just in the region, but Canadians, I think we get this social distancing. So even when we do lift restrictions, I got a feeling that we're not going to have to worry about jams of people on the street. They're going to know enough. Well, listen, looks like a crowd over there. I'm going to stay over here. I think they're going to self-regulate themselves. As far as the restaurants, I'm thinking it'd be nice if we could get our restaurants open. And there was a story coming out of Vancouver today. Their association there, they foresee that these buildings will probably have to open up at 50% capacity to keep the patrons separated. Maybe even have to put plexiglass in between the tables, and as far as at the bar, the liquor serving part, we may have to put glass or plexiglass to keep the bartender away from the patrons. But it is a whole new world. There's going to be when we open up. Unfortunately, it's not going to be like it was. Hopefully, will we get there in 2 or 3 years? Perhaps. But when we open up, there's going to be changes. But I'm very confident that the way Canadians have handled this pandemic, and we have certainly flattened the curve, I honestly think as a society, we will be able to handle it quite well.
Yeah. I second what you're saying. I'm really proud to be living in Canada and seeing how we have dealt with it at all levels with this health crisis. And I think it shows in our results. Mayor Redekop, on the same question. Beaches, streets, transportation, how is this going to be impacted when you look at Fort Erie?
So we have, there's a lot of information to unpack in that. In terms of transportation, public transit, we've been building up our system over the past 5 years. We added a new route earlier this year so that we were moving right along. I've been one of the greatest proponents of a regional transit system, simply because the people in Fort Erie need the ability, if they don't have a vehicle, to get to other parts of Niagara. And so this has really created a tremendous predicament for public transit, in the sense that conventional wisdom to date has been that people should be getting out of cars and getting into public transit because it's more economic and certainly more environmentally friendly, and would take the burden off of the need to expand some of the larger infrastructure like highways in Ontario and elsewhere. This creates a problem because you can't pack a bus if you're going to have physical distancing. And so we're looking at the prospect of maybe having more buses to carry the same number of people. Fort Erie, like all the other municipalities that have transit systems, suffered 70-75% reduction in transit users, simply because people have been told to stay at home. But there are those who have only one means of transportation to get to the grocery store, to get to places that they need to go. So we have had buses that are virtually empty, but it's a critical need for people. The other problem with public transit is it's very expensive, and it's something that has to be committed to. In the large cities, even in Niagara Falls and say St. Catharines, it's understandable why so many people would want public transit because there's the density. But in most of the municipalities in Niagara, including a town like Fort Erie, there isn't the density in all parts of the municipality to really warrant it. So many people are reliant upon a vehicle, and they don't necessarily see the benefit of public transit, although I think people by and large are generally understanding of the fact that it is necessary because there are those who don't have a license for driver's license for a variety of reasons. So that's a challenge going forward. And I do hope that it doesn't create a problem for the effort to create a Niagara region transit system, although I think this is going to slow us down quite a bit because of the physical distancing requirements, because of the concern of people to get on a bus where there are other people, and because of the economic costs with respect to it. In terms of beaches, as you know, we have a place called Bay Beach or Crystal Beach, which attracts thousands of people each summer. And on a busy day, there could be 6,000 or more people on our 1,000 feet of beach. That isn't going to be happening again anytime soon. And when we do get to the point where we can reopen, we'll be required, I'm sure, to monitor the number of people that are on that beach. That has implications for, of course, the businesses in that part of the town because they're reliant upon tourists coming in. So any one of the tourism-related businesses in Niagara, and we have a number of them in Fort Erie, which are going to suffer long-term impacts. They're in a predicament right now because many of them have to decide whether they should be making the investments necessary to reopen their businesses without really knowing when that might happen. This is something that we're going to have to take direction from the provincial government on. So those businesses don't know when they might reopen, if they're going to be reopening, under what circumstances they'll be allowed to reopen. And so, you know, some of these businesses, we're talking $50, $100, $200,000 in investments just to get their business in a position where it can welcome visitors. And that's, you know, bringing on new people, making sure that their property is in the condition that it needs to be for safety. And so that's a predicament. And to the extent that we can, we're trying to assist businesses by waiving, as other municipalities in Niagara have done, late penalties on tax payments, water and sewer payments, at least till the end of June. We'll have a look at it then and see what happens from there. We're probably going to be deferring our last two tax installments in Fort Erie from June the 30th and September 30th, probably another month beyond those dates, just to give businesses an opportunity to get back together. We've been directing businesses through our Economic Development and Tourism Services Department to the federal and provincial websites with respect to assistance available to them and to their employees. And we're encouraging them to reach out if they need assistance. But our EDTCS department has actually made direct contact with about 600 of our 679 businesses to make sure that if there are things that they need or things that we can assist them with, we're there and available. The other thing that we've done for the community to assist businesses, we've set up a business map which indicates which businesses are operating because they're essential businesses, which ones are operating at a lesser scale because they're non-essential but they're allowed to deliver certain services, and then which businesses are closed because they can't manage to provide the service or the goods that they have in the past. So that's updated regularly, and we're working on that. The other thing that everyone should be aware of, and I know I'm creeping into other questions, but there is a rapid response team that's been set up by the region and the 6 municipalities that have economic development offices, or maybe it's 7 now, to look at things that they can do to assist businesses currently and things that they'll be doing going forward. So, you know, what will the recovery plan look like? How will we be able to facilitate that? So that's something that we're working on. And then to get to your other point about infrastructure, municipalities are creatures of the province. We're created by the province. We operate by the rules that the province gives us. And one of those rules is that we're supposed to manage our financial situation so that we have balanced budgets each and every year. And we can borrow money. We can borrow money by debenture, but typically we're required to maintain balanced budgets. So the retrofitting of not so much the streets, but the sidewalks, the recreation trails, the parks to accommodate people, that's something that really I think needs a lot of study to figure out what we're going to need to do. I would expect that as we reopen, there will be requirements that people wear masks depending on where they're going. I just don't envisage people going into stores when we reopen without wearing masks. I can't imagine that's going to happen. Or getting on public transit. Maybe going to a park or on the recreation trail might be a little bit different. I agree with Mayor Junkin in terms of optimism. I'm very optimistic. I'm not quite as, I guess I admire Mayor Junkin's benign view of human nature. I think that the vast majority of people will get with and stay with the program. There will always be those who think for some reason the program doesn't apply to them. That's the challenge for us. And so hopefully by the time we get through this and get to the stage where we're reopening, everyone will understand that they have to act responsibly. It's not because of them, it's because those around them need to be protected. And in particular, those that are trying to serve us need to be protected. Sorry for the long-winded response. I am a lawyer.
No, I really appreciate it. I wanted to say that I appreciate especially a couple of things. We have personally found it's excellent the Niagara region and all the municipalities having come together to create the rapid response team. One of the reasons why we are really supportive of it is that this team with the surveys that you send out is trying to look for information and data. And especially the first survey that was sent out to 10,000 businesses and 2,600 of them actually participated in it. It was really a great indicator that if 26%, that is a very high number of any survey response that is there, but if 2,600 people are willing to give 10, 15 minutes to a survey to share what they're going through, it really speaks to our need and wish to connect with one another, to learn from one another, and I think that's critical. I also want to congratulate you actually of having reached out to your own businesses in your own community and tracking some of it and the data and what they're experiencing. We've heard from municipalities across Niagara that there is that focus on it is trying to say, like, who's open, what are the needs that are there? Because as we're moving forward, many of the subsidies and the things that have been offered have been broad to some degree, but they haven't been industry specific. So when we look at a sector like tourism and accommodation services, retail and other areas like this, they are going to be harder hit, and the recovery period is likely going to be longer than what we might see in the construction sector and others. And to be able to see that difference so that we can adjust what is being offered and how we're supporting them, I think it's critical. But Mayor Redekop, while I have you, on this particular question has also come forward to you, and it is because we are a border town. And this is the question that has come in, when a shock suffered by the economy as pervasive as COVID-19, all businesses will endure hardship, either directly or indirectly, due to a break in the supply chain. It's a shock to the supply chain. We're roughly 4 months into the global coronavirus pandemic and just about 7 weeks into a collaborative attempt to thwart further contamination in North America. And to support that, Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump have agreed to limit cross-border flows between Canada and the United States to essential travel and commercial traffic. It is the right decision. But that being said, there are signs that the virus may be slowing down, with many now turning their attention to what is next. You have partners on the other side of the border. What has the dialogue been like? What will it look like? How do we best align our economic recovery phases in the cross-border context? Over to you.
Yeah, so in terms of the dialogue between me and my counterparts on the other side of the river, it's been very, very, very limited. since this all started. In fact, one of the last times I crossed the border, might have been the last time I crossed the border, would have been the early part of March. And I met with the Canadian Consul General, who's stationed in New York City, but he happened to be in Buffalo. And there was a reception. I met with him because we were talking about an issue relative to the number of Canada Border Services agents on our border. So at that time, we were thinking about the need for more human resources at the border because of the flow of traffic. Well, 3 weeks later, that wasn't a problem anymore. But so there's been not an awful lot that we've had going on together. In terms of the border, though, we have a resolution on our agenda for Monday night, our regular council meeting, being brought forward by Councillor McDermott. And it talks about our desire that the Prime Minister and the Premier maintain the restrictions on the border until such time as there's equal progress in dealing with the spread of the virus on both sides of the border. Now, I would expect that the list of essential businesses will be expanded to include some of the what are currently defined as non-essential businesses, because there is a lot of exporting and importing that takes place, not just in Niagara, but in Fort Erie in particular. And so some of our businesses are quite reliant upon getting goods across the border or supplies into Canada. So I think that'll be expanded, and that can be managed relatively easy, because Canada Border Services has a very strict protocol right now where they monitor people that are crossing the border, and they're actually following up. So if you're telling Canada Border Services that you're an essential traveler, they'll actually follow that up with a phone call at some point and find out what you're doing and making sure that you're going between work and home, which is very important. In terms of how they're doing across the border, Erie County is one of the hot spots in New York State. And yesterday they reported 93 new cases. We reported in Niagara 6. They reported 40-something deaths. I think we reported 1 or 2. So the numbers of total cases in Erie County is about 8 times what's happening in all of Niagara. The number of deaths in Erie County is more than 5 times what's happened in Niagara. We are seeing a flattening of the curve in Niagara and probably in Ontario gradually. That doesn't seem to be happening across the border. So we're very concerned about the border being opened prematurely to non-essential travel. And we have a lot of seasonal residents in Fort Erie, as does Port Colborne, as does Wainfleet, some in Niagara on the Lake. But all the communities, including Niagara Falls, along the border have a lot of tourism attractions, which really are quite reliant upon some of our visitors from the States. So we welcome them. Many of them are not just neighbors, they're family. A lot of them are good friends. Many of us have roots across the border in some fashion. So it's hard to say to your neighbors, your best friends, your family, look, we love to have you here, but for the time being, stay at home. But that's the reality. And we don't want them to be jeopardized. We don't want them to jeopardize us. So as you had pointed out, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry is going to really be significantly impacted by this, not for the next 4 months, probably for the next couple of years, as we figure out how we can reopen and get people back here in a fashion that isn't going to put people at risk. We owe that to the residents of Niagara. We owe that to the residents of Ontario. And so did I get all of your points, or is there something else that I missed?
No.
I know I drift a lot. I drift.
No, I think you really touched on it because I think we are a global marketplace, we are a global economy, but we also have to realize that not all countries will recover in the same way. And this will have a major disruption to our supply chain, and how do we best deal with it? And I think the message is that safety is number one because of the uncertainty. And that maybe once we have a virus or a vaccine that can deal with this virus and treatments that are there, then maybe we can make more courageous steps forward than what we can right now. But Mayor Junkin, this is particularly to you as well. We are in the midst of a massive experiment called remote work. You spoke about your own staff working remotely. and possibly some organizations might find it more effective in the long run. What can some municipalities do to support a remote workforce to make them feel connected to the cities, the towns, and to be a vital part of the community? What are the things, because it will change the way we might conduct business, and how do you foresee you as a town of Pelham being able to support that?
I don't know if I understand the question. I guess what I agree with you totally that when this finally shakes down, every business is going to be looking at their operation and they're going to say, wow, our employees have just been working from home, whether it be for the last 6 months, whether it be for the last 8 months, and the production is still the same as when they were coming into the office. So why are we owning this big building now? It is going to be a totally different workplace and a whole new mindset. I think working from home was coming, and I think that this has really pushed it onto the fast track for sure. As to what we can do, I can just see now that instead of the migration that happens every morning on the Queen Elizabeth Way, going around the bend and over the Skyway, that migration of people is probably going to be curtailed quite a bit. I guess the other way, of course, is that if people living in Toronto realize that they don't have to be so close and decide, well, let's go down to Niagara to live, and so then, of course, that's going to have an effect on the availability of housing and what have you. I guess all we could do is build more houses to accommodate the people that will not have to live in the big centers. It'll probably help Niagara grow if that's what we're after, is being a friendly community, a growing community, which I think all of us are striving for. So yeah, other than just working away on our infrastructure and building that up, and making sure that we have one thing I think we're lacking in the region is fast, dependable internet, good bandwidth to accommodate all these computers that are going to be on stretched over not just one building now, but stretched over a larger area. So I think that's one thing we'll have to do is look at our bandwidth and our internet services, and if they're lagging, for sure, bring them up to the standard that they have to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. We've heard this from a number of businesses across Niagara because now we're all relying on our own network that we have. Bandwidth is going to be critical, and it's something that municipalities have to look at, the province as well, and like, how do we best support that, that people are now looking at it. And yes, you are right, and I think you touched on a very interesting point. People, knowledge workers in the past had kind of thought, you know what, we need to move to Toronto, we need to move close to where our work is, because that's where we need to live. Well, maybe remote work is now showing us that maybe our offices don't need to be right next to our, our homes that we have. And as well, I think we see a great advantage. There's a high number of people in Niagara that are able to actually live in a townhouse, in a single detached home, versus other municipalities that will look at our bigger cities and higher dependencies on condos and apartment living, then maybe some people will make different decisions as we're moving forward. But I'm going to pass it on to Wayne. We have so many questions coming in, but Wayne, do you want to look at that just for a minute maybe before we move on?
Yeah, just very briefly, I agree with much of what Mayor Junkin has said. I think he's absolutely correct that the extent to which we can move to remote work really depends upon the infrastructure that's available. And there are large gaps of areas in Niagara where the infrastructure just isn't there. So the built up areas, the major suppliers of fiber have put it in the ground or put it on the poles. It's there. But there are vast areas, even in a place like Fort Erie, where it's just not available. And hopefully the federal government and the provincial government will appreciate that this is a utility now. It's a necessary utility. It's no different than hydro or telephones were a century ago. But there are distinctions in who can work at home and who can't. And there's also the need for people who work remotely to periodically connect with either customers or their coworkers, so that I do see that changing. I have a great concern about the migration from the GTA, because the cities are where this pandemic has struck the most vehemently. And the greatest casualties of the virus are in the big cities. And I think if people have an opportunity to leave the big city and go elsewhere, they're going to do that. If they weren't inclined to do it before, I think many of them will be inclined to do it now. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on the municipalities in Niagara, because many of those people will want to move here. And you know, in the old days, people would build a house. It's not that long ago, the 60s, 70s, people would build 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 square foot home. They'd raise a family in that. Now, people are coming out of the GTA and they're buying 2,200 square foot homes for just themselves and a spouse, and maybe the odd visit from friends or family. That's not sustainable on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, a lot of our municipalities have larger lots than 35 or 40 feet historically. But all of the development now is premised on the need for intensification. Provincial directives, we have no choice. So we're putting in these 40, 50 foot lots, and that's what everything looks like. That's great if you're coming from Toronto, but to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know of anybody in Niagara that wants Niagara to look like Toronto. And so we've got that challenge to deal with as well. And the biggest concern I have is the impact on the flow of people from the GTA into Niagara, on the prospects for young people to be able to buy a home. You know, my generation was one where we were all led to believe that you should own your own home. People should have the right to be able to own their own home. And I would hate to think that that's a dying dream. But the reality is, for young people, it's very difficult now to get into the market. And particularly for younger people who are in precarious employment. And there's nothing more precarious in terms of employment than something like the pandemic we've just gone through, because workforces will get back to normal over a period of time, but there will be a delay in how quickly some businesses can get back to normal. And that means that the people that work for those businesses will suffer a longer term financial hit than others. So I've got lots of concerns. I am optimistic about how this is all going to work out, but I'm also practical, and I've got some concerns about this.
And I think your concerns are actually valid in it. I am with you. It has been the Canadian way of owning your home, and that has been becoming part of your retirement fund often, that people are relying on later on in life. But it's something that when we look at European countries and others, it's not the case. Ownership of homes is not being taken for granted. And if we have an increased density in Niagara, is that going to be the same as we're moving forward? I think there's significant concerns when we look at the opportunities of young people in the future and in the near future. I feel for the ones who have just graduated and looked at the low unemployment numbers in January of this year, 4-year record of the lowest unemployment rates across Canada. And possibly now we're going to be faced with record high numbers that we have never seen and experienced in beforehand. So I think we have to take into consideration that so many facets are currently changing and need to be redefined. And that also applies what is going to happen to our housing market at the same time. It's a very complex issue here. But before we, let's move on, actually. There's so many things that we could talk about, but this particular one is looking at both the federal and provincial levels have made decisions at unprecedented speed, very courageous ones, to support individuals and businesses in an effort to minimize the economic impact on people and on communities. It is and has been encouraging to see. What can be done at a local level to encourage that when business can sustainably resume business, what can municipalities do to support them? Areas that we sometimes look at and have business have asked for in the past is the right, or is the time right to harmonize permits and fees across Niagara about both levels of government? Can we reduce the time it takes to get approval from a two-tiered government? Are there other things or opportunities that we see that maybe some departments can merge together to be more quickly and to be more responsive to the business needs that are there? Mayor Junkin, do you see any opportunities of when you look at it and saying, like, your colleagues at a provincial and federal level have made decisions, unprecedented decisions at the speed of time, and you look at where the red tape is in Niagara, do we have opportunities that you see and that you would want to advocate for?
Yes, I guess some of us, and I'm not saying I was one, but when Mr. Ford was looking at the amalgamation of the region, it was well discussed by the politicians that, well, if this happens, what could we be doing to facilitate the amalgamation? The amalgamation as such never happened, but the idea, I think, actually gave all the politicians, especially from the mayors and to the regional councilors, a needed kick in the butt. And we said, you know what, we may not support the joining of all the municipalities, but that is a very good idea that let's see what we can do at one level and take this red tape and cut through it. And thus, I think that's one reason. Of course, that amalgamation came right hot on the heels of the last provincial or municipal election. So when we got elected, and it was a basically brand new team at the region also, that and then we had only been there for whatever it was, 8 months, and all of a sudden we had this amalgamation thrown at us. So it was like this new team looking at a new way of doing things. And you're absolutely right. Amalgamating the planning departments and official plans at the region, official plans at the municipal level. I know the planners municipally, we do meet, the planners meet at least once a month, perhaps more. But yeah, there's so many areas that we can get together and get on the same page and work together. One thing, of course, the regional transit, we've been everybody's been pushing for that. And like Wayne said, yeah, unfortunately, but this is probably going to have to be put on the back burner until the economies throughout the region get rolling again. But we had such high hopes that, and the region, of course, has invested a lot of money in bringing the GO train down and what have you, and it's going to be disheartening to see that project slow down somewhat, which I'm sure it's going to have to. Hopefully it isn't going to, excuse the pun, go completely off the rails. But that was one thing that all 12 municipalities realized had to happen, was if we're going to have a vibrant Niagara, we had to move people throughout the region at as good a cost as we could. So that was one thing we were doing right off the bat, was the transit. Definitely, I can't believe, I don't think the senior levels of municipal government used to get together as they do now. I know that during the pandemic, each CAO of the 12 municipalities, they are meeting, I believe it's Sunday, Wednesdays, and Friday nights. They discuss what's going on in each municipality. It is very heartening to see such a team approach to all of our problems. So yeah, I think it's just something we got to continue working on, is harmonizing the region down to municipalities, and the municipalities up to the region. And like I said, I believe everybody's on the same team. It's just a case of bringing all this to fruition.
Yeah, I appreciate your take on it. And I do believe that in these periods of time that we're in, that often our teams need to look different too. Our teams maybe need to bring the private sector in and the employers in and the community together and making and bringing the best decisions forward. Mayor Redekop, on the same question.
So I'm in the frying pan. You're asking me to jump into the fire. The Indigenous people, when their speakers address a group, frequently will say in advance, if they offend anyone, they apologize. So I may say some things here that may offend some people. It's not my intention to do that, but I've been around for quite a while. In fact, I've gone through 2 amalgamation wars, one in 1999 and one just recently. So I have I studied politics and history in university. So I've got a fairly long standing understanding and view of government and expectations. Just to follow up on what Mayor Junkin had mentioned, the mayors have historically had gatherings of one sort or another, whether it was border mayors, whether it was mayors interested in the waterfront, or whether it was mayors gathering together. So that's something that's been historic, maybe not as frequently as it has been recently, because the current group of mayors and the one during the term just before this did get together periodically and frequently, to the consternation of the directly elected regional councillors who thought that we were up to no good and were leaving them out of deliberations. But the reality is we have a different function. We're responsible for a municipality as opposed to being a member of a council responsible for a region, although we do both. So we get together regularly. The CAOs also traditionally have met regularly, as do our directors of finance. And the planners do also periodically get together, so that there is a lot of behind the scenes collaboration, discussion about various issues. And I would say that a lot of the tension that exists in Niagara often is between the municipality, the local municipality, and the region, so that we take a different view perhaps on a planning issue, or we may take a different view on an infrastructure issue, and we have to sort that out. So there are 12 separate municipalities, all of which have a different makeup. And what might be appropriate in St. Catharines isn't necessarily appropriate in Fort Erie. What type of development is taking place in Lincoln may not be similar to what's taking place in Niagara Falls, although the rules can be aligned. And in many cases, the province provides us with fairly stringent guidelines as to what certain things can look like, what we can do in terms of development, what the timeline should be in terms of processing applications and that type of thing. So there has been work towards trying to realign services, as Mayor Junkin spoke about, to create better efficiencies. In fact, Fort Erie and Pelham are contemplating sharing a lawyer right now, and we're in the process, I think, of interviewing potential candidates. Fort Erie and Port Colborne share a health coordinator, health services coordinator. So that, and I know that this goes on in other parts of the region where municipalities are sharing human resources and trying to make sure that we are providing the best service to our businesses and residents as we possibly can at the most efficient and effective price. So that is happening. We're not, some of the politicians in Niagara are actually business people. I'm a lawyer, but I do have a business. I run a business, maybe not as well as some people, but I'm a business person. So I understand all about red tape. I understand the requirements that are being placed upon us. And I understand areas where that could be reduced. We are keeping an eye on that. And I do believe that the municipalities will get this sorted out with the region. I don't for a minute think that that one policy will fit all of the municipalities, but certainly one set of rules on how to process things would make a lot of sense. And so I'd be supportive of that. And as I said, and as Mayor Junkin has said, the realignment of the services and the provision of better services to businesses and residents is something that they should expect. And it's something that we can deliver. So I'll leave it at that before I say anything that may be offensive.
Yeah. We are encouraged by the political will that we have seen at the provincial and federal levels of making decisions and understanding where are the hurdles and how can we overcome them. And being courageous in those decisions. And we see it in Canada, we see it in many other countries around the world. And I think sometimes that inspires us. I think that's where maybe the best that comes out of a crisis is actually the courage to make decisions that we normally wouldn't have made in beforehand in an effort to support our community, because we want the businesses and we want the economy to recover, because it makes a difference to every neighbor, to every child that we have, to the next generation that we have. And I think that whenever we look at these decisions, say like these, we're willing to do it, we're willing to overcome some of the hurdles of time, some of the hurdles of inconsistency, then why not? You know, why not look at it and be courageous and bold as we're moving forward? Because it's in the interest of our own communities and it's the interest of Greater Niagara. I'm totally conscious of time and there's so many questions, but I'm said when we wrap up that I would give you each about a minute for wrap-up comments, but I was wondering if in your wrap-up comments you could address one particular question in one way. Often when economies are down, the federal government and provincial governments are focusing on infrastructure investments to ignite those economies again. In Niagara, as we have across Canada, it has an ever-growing infrastructure backlog. What would be a priority of yours? We have spoken about affordable housing in the past. We have talked about different areas of our own infrastructure backlog in our own communities. In your closing comments for this webinar, if you can address it, that's fine. If you don't get to it, it's good too. I think Mayor Junkin, if I could ask you to look at that question first, and then I'll pass the mic over to Mayor Redekop.
Thank you. That guarantees that I will get something to say then. So yeah, interesting question. I guess I would look on it. I as being a mayor, I'm also a regional counselor, and I know that the region is like you say, is really going to be facing a crunch on the infrastructure in the next couple of years. It hasn't been maintained perhaps at the level it should have been the last couple of years, and we know that in 2021, 22, the council is actually referring to it as a wall that's going to be up. So. As much as I would love to see some projects coming in Pelham, whether it be helping with roads, but I know that Sam Osterhoff has helped Pelham get some hefty grants for some roads and hours that need attention. I would like to see, I would be very happy if we could get some regional, help at the regional level, whether that be for building some pumping stations, laying some infrastructure to possibly expand some urban boundaries, and for goodness sake, affordable housing. Everybody on that council table at the region, we realize what a, and I don't think it's too strong a word, what a catastrophe the housing question is in the not just the region, of course, but all across Canada. And if they could do something, if that could be one big thing that came out of this, that they could send some money out, not just to the region, but to the communities across Canada, and say, here's some X number of billions. Let's see if we can't work on this housing problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Redekop.
So tomorrow, May the 1st, is National Doctors Day, and at 9 p.m., everyone is being encouraged to shine a light to recognize the efforts of the physicians during this pandemic. And we'll be shining a light for sure, because we have a daughter who's a physician who's in the middle of this. And this is very, very difficult times for healthcare providers. So it's not just the doctors, the nurses, the PSWs, all the support staff. It's a very difficult time because we're expecting them to put themselves in harm's way to ensure that all of us remain safe. So I would encourage everybody in Niagara to make sure that they do their part. Make sure that you keep your social distance, don't leave home unless you absolutely have to, because it's not about you, it's about those around you. And that's how we're going to come out of this. The sooner, the better that we pay attention to those directives, the sooner we're going to come out of this. So I want to shout out to all of the healthcare workers, the first responders, the people who are involved in essential services, including, you know, people like store clerks, who have to work and who are doing it to make sure that we can follow the directives. In terms of the future and in terms of infrastructure, I think Mayor Junkin's touched on some of them. I'd like to look at maybe the other aspect of this, which is the human resources side, in terms of what we're going to need to ensure that we have the capacity going forward to deal with another situation such as this, if it arises, to make sure that there is redundancy in the system, so that if we are encountering this type of situation, we have the redundancy, and to make sure that there's better coordination between the agencies that are charged with dealing with this type of emergency or crisis. So that would be one of the things that I think the upper levels of government should be looking at. And as I said before, the high-speed internet, that's something that's crucial. It's critical. It's going to be necessary not only for businesses, but for the residents to be able to function properly. And yeah, I think Mayor Junkin's touched on the others. There's just a wealth of them. The best thing that the municipalities can do is make sure that if they've got infrastructure projects, they're shovel ready, so that when there is funding from the upper levels of government, we're ready to go. And some of those shovel ready projects will include opportunities for new businesses, new resort type development, such as we're looking at in Fort Erie at our marina. So we've got opportunities. Let's take advantage of them.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect way to wrap up today's webinar. To both of you, Mayor Redekop and Mayor Junkin, thank you very much for being part of it. You both have reminded us that we will get through this pandemic. We will go back to our work and school. We will gather in restaurants and theaters and sports stadiums again. But when we do, municipalities and their leaders will not simply return to business as usual. And it was good to hear from both of you this morning that this is not your plan. So thank you for that. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on our website, GNCC.ca, and will be emailed to all webinar participants directly. Sometimes we mentioned throughout the last hour, we talked about resources and subsidies. For a complete list, please check out our website. If you would like to reach out to any of us directly to receive our daily updates or for further questions on any of it, we can be reached at info@gncc.ca. Our Mayor series is continuing on Tuesday and at the same time at 10 o'clock with Mayor Easton of Lincoln and Mayor Campion from Welland. And if you have time on Monday evening between 7 and 8 p.m., please join the Honorable Melanie Joly, the Federal Minister of Economic Development, for a video conference and economic update. Our webinar is presented by chambers from across Niagara, and for more information, please check our website or contact me directly at mishka@gncc.ca. Lastly, to all participants, thank you for joining us. Please stay in touch and above all, stay healthy. Thank you.